Detective Inspector Jack Miller, a name whispered with a mix of respect and apprehension in the precinct, stood staring at the rain-streaked window. Outside, London's grey skyline mirrored the grim mood inside the opulent penthouse apartment. Miller wasn't your typical hard-boiled detective. He preferred tea to coffee, classical music to the blare of police sirens, and his methods were more akin to a chess master than a street brawler. He was known for his meticulous attention to detail, his ability to see patterns where others saw chaos, and, most importantly, for solving the unsolvable. He'd earned his reputation the hard way, working his way up from a beat cop to heading the serious crimes unit. He had a knack for getting inside the minds of criminals, understanding their motivations, and predicting their next moves. It was this skill that had made him a legend, and it was this skill that was desperately needed now. A uniformed officer coughed nervously, breaking Miller's train of thought. "Sir, the commissioner is on his way. He wants a preliminary assessment." Miller sighed, running a hand through his already disheveled hair. "Tell him I'll be down in 5 minutes." He turned back to the scene. The victim, Arthur Finch, a renowned art dealer, lay sprawled on the Persian rug in his study. There was no sign of forced entry, no witnesses, and no apparent motive. It looked, on the surface, like the perfect crime. The kind that made headlines and haunted detectives for years. The apartment was eerily pristine. Every object seemed to be in its place, as if staged. The only sign of a struggle was an overturned glass on a side table and a displaced cushion on the sofa. Finch's lifeless eyes stared blankly at the ceiling, reflecting the cold, uncaring light of the chandelier. Miller knelt beside the body, his keen eyes scanning every inch of the room. He noticed the subtle details that others might have missed, the faint scent of almonds lingering in the air, the almost imperceptible scratch on the mahogany desk, the slight misalignment of a framed painting. "Forensics have finished their initial sweep, sir," another officer reported. "They've found nothing of significance. No fibers, no hairs, no fingerprints other than the victim's." Miller nodded slowly, his mind already piecing together the puzzle. A professional, he thought. Someone who knew how to cover their tracks. Someone who had planned this meticulously. But even the most careful plans could unravel with a single, careless mistake. He had seen it happen time and time again. It was just a matter of finding that mistake. The smallest oversight. The misplaced detail. He stood up, his gaze sweeping across the room one last time. "This is far from over," he murmured to himself. "Someone made a mistake. They always do. And we're going to find it." He paused at the doorway, looking back at the body. "This wasn't perfect, Mr. Finch. Not even close." The apartment itself spoke of wealth and refined taste. Expensive paintings adorned the walls, sculptures stood on pedestals, and antique furniture filled the rooms. Each item seemed carefully placed, contributing to an overall atmosphere of understated elegance. It was a space designed to impress, to convey a sense of power and sophistication. The study, where Finch's body was discovered, was the most telling room of all. Books lined the walls, not the mass-produced paperbacks but leather-bound first editions. A large mahogany desk dominated the center of the room, cluttered with papers and artifacts. A half-finished glass of amber liquid sat on the desk, presumably Finch's favorite scotch. Arthur Finch was not just an art dealer, he was a significant figure in London's art world. He owned several galleries, advised wealthy collectors, and had a reputation for discovering and promoting new talent. His opinion was highly valued, and his influence extended far beyond the art scene. He moved in circles of power, mingling with politicians, celebrities, and captains of industry. His death sent shockwaves through the city. The newspapers were already filled with speculation, and the pressure on the police to solve the case was immense. The commissioner himself was breathing down Miller's neck, demanding updates and progress reports. The crime scene team meticulously documented every detail. Photographs were taken, measurements were recorded, and samples were collected. But as Miller had already noted, there was frustratingly little to work with. No signs of forced entry suggested that Finch knew his killer, or at least allowed them into his apartment willingly. The lack of a clear motive added another layer of complexity to the investigation. Was it a business deal gone wrong? A personal vendetta? Or something else entirely? The neatness of the scene bothered Miller. It was too perfect, too sterile. Killers rarely tidy up after themselves. They are usually driven by emotion, leaving behind a trail of chaos and disorder. This felt different. This felt calculated, deliberate. He circled back to the overturned glass on the side table. It was a small detail, but it caught his attention. The glass was empty, but the faint scent of almonds lingered in the air. Cyanide, perhaps. He made a mental note to have the glass analyzed. He examined the scratch on the mahogany desk more closely. It was almost invisible, but it was there. It looked like it had been made by a sharp object, perhaps a knife or a letter opener. Was it related to the crime? Or simply an old imperfection on the desk? As Miller surveyed the scene, he knew one thing for sure: this was not a random act of violence. This was a carefully planned and executed murder. And the killer, whoever they were, had gone to great lengths to cover their tracks. But Miller was determined to find them, to unravel the mystery, and to bring them to justice. The pressure was on, the stakes were high, but he wouldn't rest until he had solved the case. 2 weeks prior, in a dimly lit, sparsely furnished room miles away from Finch's penthouse, Mr. Smith meticulously reviewed his plan. The room, his temporary sanctuary, was devoid of any personal touches, a blank canvas reflecting his singular focus. A single lamp illuminated a table covered with maps, diagrams, and notes scribbled in a neat, precise hand. Mr. Smith, a man who preferred to blend into the background, was transformed. The quiet accountant, the unassuming neighbor, was gone, replaced by a calculating strategist, a meticulous planner obsessed with every detail. He had spent months studying Arthur Finch, learning his habits, his routines, his vulnerabilities. He knew Finch's schedule better than Finch himself. He had chosen his weapon carefully, a fast-acting poison, untraceable if administered correctly. He had researched the effects, the dosage, the potential side effects. He knew how to mask the scent of almonds, how to dispose of the remaining poison, how to leave no trace. He rehearsed his movements in his mind, visualizing every step, every action. He would arrive at Finch's apartment at precisely 8:17 p.m., posing as a deliverman with a package. He would gain access to the apartment without raising suspicion. He would engage Finch in conversation, offering him a drink laced with the poison. He would wait for the poison to take effect, ensuring that Finch suffered as little as possible. He had even considered the weather forecast, adjusting his attire to blend in with the expected conditions. He had studied the security cameras in the building, identifying blind spots and devising routes to avoid detection. He had purchased a burner phone to communicate with his accomplice, ensuring that his own phone records would remain clean. He thought of everything. Gloves to avoid leaving fingerprints. Shoe covers to prevent tracking in dirt. A change of clothes to discard after the act. A prepaid taxi to take him far away from the scene. An alibi, carefully constructed and rehearsed. He had even practiced his facial expressions, ensuring that he would appear calm and collected, even under pressure. He had studied interrogation techniques, anticipating the questions he might be asked, preparing his responses. Mr. Smith believed he had accounted for every contingency. He had eliminated every risk. He had created the perfect plan, a foolproof scheme that would leave no room for error. He was confident that he would succeed, that he would get away with it. He was wrong, of course. Because even the most meticulous plans can be undone by a single, unforeseen mistake. A moment of carelessness. A lapse in judgment. A discarded coffee cup. But Mr. Smith, in his meticulous planning, had not yet considered the coffee. That would be his undoing. The deed was done. Arthur Finch was dead. Mr. Smith, adhering to his meticulously crafted plan, calmly exited the apartment building, melting into the anonymity of the London night. The adrenaline coursing through his veins masked the slight tremor in his hands. He followed his predetermined route, discarding his gloves and shoe covers in a discreet alleyway. He changed clothes in the back of the prepaid taxi, leaving no trace of his presence in Finch's building. He felt a surge of triumph, a sense of accomplishment. He had executed the perfect crime. He had outsmarted everyone. He was free. But as the taxi sped away, a craving gnawed at him. Coffee. He needed coffee. The tension, the planning, the execution had left him drained, and he longed for the familiar warmth and comfort of a caffeine boost. He instructed the taxi driver to stop at a small, independent coffee shop a few blocks from his destination. It was a place he had frequented before, a nondescript establishment where he could blend in without attracting attention. He ordered a black coffee, savoring the aroma as he waited. The coffee was hot, strong, and exactly what he needed. He sat at a small table near the window, watching the city lights blur through the steam rising from his cup. For a brief moment, he allowed himself to relax, to bask in the satisfaction of his success. He finished the coffee quickly, the caffeine already starting to work its magic. He stood up, ready to resume his journey, to complete the final steps of his plan. But then, the unthinkable happened. Instead of carefully disposing of the coffee cup, as his meticulous planning would have dictated, he hesitated. He was tired, his mind still racing. He glanced around, saw a public bin conveniently located just outside the coffee shop, and, without thinking, tossed the cup into the bin. It was a split-second decision, a moment of carelessness, a fatal mistake. He walked away, unaware that he had just left behind the one piece of evidence that would unravel his entire plan. The coffee cup, bearing his fingerprints, sat innocently amidst the other discarded rubbish, a silent testament to his imperfect act. He continued on his way, confident that he had gotten away with it. He had no idea that, at that very moment, his meticulously constructed world was about to come crashing down around him. That the aroma of roasted beans and the careless toss of a paper cup would be his undoing. That forensics would soon be on his tail. The coffee shop seemed innocuous, but in reality, it was the start of Mr. Smith's capture. Back at Finch's apartment, Detective Miller and his team were hitting a wall. Days had passed since the murder, and despite their best efforts, they had made little progress. The crime scene had been thoroughly processed, analyzed, and reanalyzed, but the evidence remained frustratingly elusive. "It's like he vanished into thin air," Sergeant Davies, Miller's second-in-command, said, frustration evident in his voice. "No witnesses, no forced entry, no murder weapon. Nothing." Miller, however, remained unfazed. He had faced similar situations before, cases that seemed impossible to crack. He knew that patience and persistence were key. "We just need to keep digging," he said. "Something will turn up. It always does." The team meticulously reviewed the evidence again, poring over photographs, crime scene reports, and witness statements. They interviewed Finch's friends, family, and business associates, searching for any clue, any motive, any connection that could lead them to the killer. They delved into Finch's financial records, scrutinizing every transaction, every investment, every debt. They explored his personal life, uncovering a web of relationships, rivalries, and secrets. But despite their exhaustive efforts, they found nothing concrete. No smoking gun, no obvious suspect. The case was growing colder by the hour. Miller focused on the small details he had noticed at the scene. The faint scent of almonds. The scratch on the desk. The overturned glass. He ordered further analysis of these items, hoping to find something that the initial investigation had missed. He also requested a thorough search of the area surrounding Finch's apartment building. He knew that the killer had to have left the scene somehow, and he wanted to be sure that they hadn't overlooked any potential evidence. "Check every bin, every alleyway, every security camera," he instructed. "I want every inch of this neighborhood combed." Someone saw something. Someone knows something. We just need to find them. The team fanned out, their frustration replaced by a renewed sense of purpose. They knew that Miller was counting on them, that the pressure to solve the case was immense. They were determined to do everything in their power to bring Finch's killer to justice. But as they searched, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were chasing a ghost. That the killer was too clever, too careful, too far ahead of them. They didn't yet know that the key to unlocking the case lay not in Finch's apartment, but in a discarded coffee cup a few blocks away. A seemingly insignificant piece of rubbish that would soon expose a killer's carefully constructed lie. The investigation felt like searching for a needle in a haystack, but the needle was there, waiting to be found. The task of searching the bins fell to PC David Riley, a fresh-faced officer eager to prove himself. He was assigned the area a few blocks from Finch's apartment, a stretch of busy streets lined with shops and cafes. It was a tedious and unglamorous job, sifting through discarded rubbish, hoping to find something, anything, that might be connected to the murder. Most of the bins contained the usual assortment of fast food wrappers, cigarette butts, and discarded newspapers. Riley diligently checked each one, carefully examining every item, but found nothing of interest. He was starting to lose hope, wondering if he was wasting his time. Then, in a bin outside a small coffee shop, he saw it. A simple paper coffee cup, crumpled and stained with coffee residue. It seemed insignificant, unremarkable. Just another piece of rubbish in a city full of rubbish. But something about it caught his eye. The coffee shop was a few blocks away from Finch's apartment, along the route that the killer might have taken to escape. And the cup looked relatively new, as if it had been discarded recently. He hesitated. Was it worth taking back to the station? It seemed unlikely that a coffee cup could be connected to the murder. But Miller's instructions were clear, check everything. And Riley was determined to follow orders. He carefully retrieved the cup, placing it in a plastic evidence bag. He noted the location of the bin, the time of the discovery, and any other relevant details. Then, he radioed in his find to headquarters. "I found a coffee cup in a bin near the crime scene," he reported. "It doesn't look like much, but it might be worth checking out." The dispatcher sounded skeptical, but she relayed the information to Sergeant Davies. Davies, in turn, informed Detective Miller. Miller, initially dismissive, paused when he heard the location of the bin. It was along a potential escape route. And the fact that the cup was relatively new piqued his interest. "Bring it in," he instructed. "Let's see what forensics can make of it." Riley felt a surge of pride. He had found something. Something that might actually be useful. He carefully transported the coffee cup back to the station, his heart pounding with anticipation. He knew that it was a long shot, that the cup might turn out to be nothing more than a piece of rubbish. But he also knew that in the world of detective work, even the smallest clue could be the key to unlocking the biggest mysteries. And he had a feeling that this coffee cup might just be the break they were looking for. It was a small find, but it was a start. And sometimes, that's all you need. The coffee cup arrived at the forensics lab, a sterile environment filled with sophisticated equipment and the faint scent of chemicals. Sarah, a highly skilled forensics technician with a reputation for meticulousness and an uncanny ability to find what others missed, received the package. She approached her work with a quiet intensity, her focus unwavering, her attention to detail unparalleled. Sarah wasn't just a technician, she was a scientist, an investigator, a puzzle solver. She had a deep understanding of forensic principles and a passion for uncovering the truth. She had seen countless pieces of evidence pass through her lab, each one a potential key to solving a crime. She carefully opened the evidence bag, removing the coffee cup with gloved hands. She examined it under a bright light, noting its size, shape, and material. She carefully photographed it, documenting every stain, every crease, every imperfection. "Another piece of trash," muttered one of her colleagues, glancing at the cup. "Waste of time, if you ask me." Sarah ignored him. She had learned to tune out the skepticism and the cynicism. She knew that even the most insignificant piece of evidence could hold vital clues. She began by examining the cup for any traces of DNA. She swabbed the rim, the sides, and the bottom, collecting samples that would be sent to the DNA analysis unit. She also checked for any traces of fibers or hairs, using a powerful microscope to examine the surface of the cup. But her primary focus was on fingerprints. She knew that fingerprints were unique to each individual and could be used to identify a suspect with absolute certainty. She carefully dusted the cup with fingerprint powder, using a fine brush to apply a thin, even layer. Then, she gently blew away the excess powder, revealing any latent fingerprints that might be present. As she worked, she felt a flicker of excitement. There were several clear fingerprints on the cup, well-defined and easily identifiable. This was promising. She carefully photographed each fingerprint, capturing every ridge, every valley, every detail. Then, she lifted the fingerprints using special adhesive tape, transferring them to fingerprint cards. She knew that the next step would be to run the fingerprints through the Automated Fingerprint Identification System, AFIS, a vast database containing millions of fingerprints. It was a long shot, but if the fingerprints matched someone in the database, it could break the case wide open. Sarah carefully prepared the fingerprint cards for scanning, ensuring that they were properly aligned and free of any contaminants. She took a deep breath and initiated the search. The computer whirred, and the screen filled with images of fingerprints. The waiting began. She knew that the next few minutes could change everything. The coffee cup, once a piece of trash, now held the key to unlocking the truth. The AFIS system hummed, its processors working tirelessly to compare the fingerprints from the coffee cup against millions of others stored in its vast database. Sarah watched the screen intently, her heart pounding in her chest. The seconds stretched into minutes, each one feeling like an eternity. Finally, after what seemed like an age, a match appeared on the screen. A small window popped up, displaying a fingerprint that was remarkably similar to the one Sarah had lifted from the coffee cup. Possible match, the system announced in a monotone voice. Sarah leaned closer, her eyes scanning the details of the potential match. The ridge patterns, the bifurcations, the minutiae points, they all aligned almost perfectly. She clicked on the match, bringing up the individual's profile. The screen displayed a name, John Smith. And a photograph. Sarah stared at the photograph, her mind racing. John Smith. The name didn't immediately ring any bells. But something about the face seemed familiar. She clicked on Smith's record, bringing up his criminal history. It was minimal, a minor charge of petty theft from several years ago. Nothing that would suggest he was capable of murder. But the fingerprint match was undeniable. And that was enough to pique her interest. She immediately printed out the fingerprint report and the Smith's profile, and hurried to find Detective Miller. She found him in his office, poring over crime scene photos. He looked tired, his face etched with frustration. "I think we have something," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. Miller looked up, his eyes narrowing. "What is it?" Sarah handed him the fingerprint report and Smith's profile. A match from the coffee cup. John Smith. Minor criminal record. Miller scanned the documents, his expression unreadable. He studied the fingerprint comparison, his eyes flicking back and forth between the two images. "This is good work, Sarah," he said finally, a hint of excitement in his voice. "Very good work." He leaned back in his chair, his mind already racing. John Smith. Who was he? What was his connection to Arthur Finch? And why was his fingerprint on a coffee cup near the crime scene? He knew that he had a lot of questions to answer. But for the first time in days, he felt a glimmer of hope. He had a lead. A name. A face. And that was enough to get him started. The discarded coffee cup, thanks to Sarah's expertise, had just cracked the case wide open. The hunt for Mr. Smith was officially on. The fact that John Smith had only a minor criminal record from years ago made the situation even more intriguing. It suggested that he wasn't a hardened criminal, but rather someone who had perhaps been driven to commit murder for a specific reason. Or perhaps he had been very careful to avoid getting caught in the past. Miller immediately tasked his team with digging deeper into Smith's background. He wanted to know everything about him: his address, his employment history, his relationships, his finances. He wanted to know what made him tick. "I want every aspect of this guy's life scrutinized," Miller ordered. "Leave no stone unturned. Find out what his connection to Finch was. Find out his motive." Sergeant Davies and the team sprang into action, their renewed energy fueled by the breakthrough. They tracked down Smith's address, a small, unassuming flat in a working-class neighborhood. They dispatched officers to conduct surveillance, hoping to catch him in the act of something suspicious. They contacted Smith's employer, a small accounting firm, and learned that he was a quiet, unassuming employee who kept to himself. He was described as reliable and hard-working, but also somewhat of a loner. They interviewed Smith's neighbors, who described him as a friendly but reserved man who rarely had visitors. No one seemed to know much about his personal life. As the team delved deeper, they began to uncover a few intriguing details. Smith had been struggling financially for years, burdened by debt and facing mounting bills. He had also recently been passed over for a promotion at work, a setback that had reportedly left him feeling bitter and resentful. But the most significant discovery was Smith's connection to Arthur Finch. It turned out that Smith's accounting firm had done some work for Finch's art galleries in the past. Smith had even met Finch on a few occasions. The motive was starting to take shape. Perhaps Smith had been embezzling money from Finch, and Finch had discovered the theft. Or perhaps Smith had been resentful of Finch's wealth and success, and had decided to take matters into his own hands. Miller knew that he was still missing pieces of the puzzle. But he was confident that he was on the right track. The fingerprint match had given him a solid lead, and he was determined to follow it to the end. He reviewed the evidence again, piecing together the timeline of events. Smith had planned the murder meticulously, using poison to avoid leaving any trace evidence. He had carefully disposed of his gloves and shoe covers. He had created an alibi. But he had made one fatal mistake: he had carelessly tossed his coffee cup into a public bin. And that mistake had led the police straight to his door. The minor record from years ago had resurfaced to haunt him. Mr. Smith's perfect plan was unraveling, one fingerprint at a time. Detective Miller sat in his office, reviewing the information his team had gathered on John Smith. The picture that was emerging was far from flattering. Smith was a man on the edge, struggling financially, resentful of his lack of success, and harboring a secret connection to the victim. The connection to Finch was particularly troubling. While Smith's accounting firm had done work for Finch's galleries, the records showed that Smith himself had handled Finch's account for a brief period. During that time, there had been some discrepancies in the financial records, small amounts of money that had gone missing. Miller suspected that Smith had been embezzling from Finch, and that Finch had discovered the theft. This could explain Smith's motive for murder. He also discovered that Smith had recently taken out a large life insurance policy on himself, naming his estranged wife as the beneficiary. This suggested that he was planning something drastic, something that would provide for his family after he was gone. The surveillance team reported that Smith had been acting strangely in recent days. He had been seen visiting a local pawn shop, where he had sold some valuable items. He had also been spotted near Finch's apartment building on several occasions, seemingly casing the place. Miller knew that he had enough evidence to bring Smith in for questioning. But he wanted to build a stronger case before making an arrest. He wanted to be sure that he had enough evidence to convict Smith beyond a reasonable doubt. He ordered the team to obtain a warrant to search Smith's apartment. He was confident that they would find more evidence there, evidence that would further link Smith to the murder. "I want every inch of that apartment searched," Miller instructed. "I want to find the poison, the murder weapon, anything that connects him to Finch." The search of Smith's apartment yielded several key pieces of evidence. They found a small vial of cyanide hidden in a drawer, the same poison that had been used to kill Finch. They found a receipt from the coffee shop near Finch's apartment, dated the night of the murder. And they found a handwritten note detailing Smith's plan to kill Finch, including the motive and the method. The evidence was overwhelming. Miller knew that he had his man. He ordered Smith's immediate arrest. As Smith was being taken into custody, he remained silent, his face expressionless. He seemed resigned to his fate, as if he had known all along that he would eventually be caught. The coffee cup, the discarded piece of rubbish, had led to his downfall. Mr. Smith's carefully constructed world had crumbled around him, exposing him for what he truly was, a cold-blooded killer. The game was up. Even with the evidence from Smith's apartment, Detective Miller knew that he needed to build an airtight case. Circumstantial evidence, while compelling, was not always enough to secure a conviction. He needed to eliminate any reasonable doubt. He ordered his team to re-interview all of Finch's associates, focusing on anyone who might have had a motive to harm him. He wanted to ensure that Smith was the only viable suspect. He also ordered a thorough analysis of Smith's financial records, looking for any evidence of embezzlement or financial transactions that could link him to Finch. The team discovered that Smith had been making small, unauthorized transfers from Finch's account into his own personal account for several months. The total amount was relatively small, but it was enough to establish a clear motive for murder. They also learned that Smith had been struggling with gambling debts for years, a secret that he had kept hidden from his family and friends. This explained his desperate financial situation and his need for money. The surveillance team obtained security camera footage from the coffee shop near Finch's apartment. The footage showed Smith entering the coffee shop on the night of the murder, ordering a coffee, and then discarding the cup in the bin outside. The team also found witnesses who had seen Smith near Finch's apartment building in the days leading up to the murder. One witness even recalled seeing Smith arguing with Finch outside the building a few weeks before the crime. The evidence was mounting, painting a clear picture of Smith as a desperate man who had been driven to commit murder. The circumstantial evidence was now overwhelming, leaving little doubt in Miller's mind that Smith was guilty. He contacted the district attorney and presented the case. The DA was impressed with the strength of the evidence and agreed to prosecute Smith to the fullest extent of the law. "This is a solid case, Miller," the DA said. "You've done excellent work. I'm confident that we'll get a conviction." Miller felt a sense of satisfaction. He had solved a seemingly impossible case, thanks to a discarded coffee cup and the meticulous work of his team. He knew that justice would be served. But he also felt a sense of sadness. He had seen firsthand the depths of human depravity, the lengths that people would go to for money and power. He knew that there were many more cases out there, waiting to be solved. And he was determined to find them, to unravel the mysteries, and to bring the guilty to justice. The building of the case was complete, now it was time to face Mr. Smith. Mr. Smith was brought into the interrogation room, his face pale and drawn. He was dressed in the same unassuming clothes he always wore, a gray suit, a white shirt and a plain tie. He looked like a lost accountant, out of his element and terrified. Detective Miller sat across from him, his gaze steady and unwavering. He knew that Smith was a meticulous planner, a man who had thought through every detail of his crime. He also knew that Smith was likely to be nervous and anxious, and that he might make mistakes under pressure. "Mr. Smith," Miller began, his voice calm and measured, "we need to ask you some questions about the murder of Arthur Finch." Smith shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his eyes darting around the room. "I don't know anything about that," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I had nothing to do with it." Miller leaned forward, his gaze intensifying. "We have evidence that suggests otherwise, Mr. Smith. We know that you knew Mr. Finch. We know that you had financial problems. And we know that you were near his apartment on the night of the murder." Smith's face flushed, but he maintained his composure. "I'm an accountant," he said. "I do work for a lot of people. It doesn't mean I killed anyone. Miller nodded slowly. That's true, Mr. Smith. But we also have your fingerprints on a coffee cup that was found near the crime scene. Can you explain that? Smith hesitated, his eyes narrowing. I don't know how my fingerprints got there, he stammered. I must have touched it at some point. I drink coffee all the time. Miller smiled faintly. That's a convenient explanation, Mr. Smith. But we also have security camera footage of you entering the coffee shop on the night of the murder. And we have witnesses who saw you near Finch's apartment building in the days leading up to the crime. Smith remained silent, his face a mask of defiance. He knew that he was in trouble, but he was determined to maintain his innocence. Mr. Smith, Miller continued, we found a vial of cyanide in your apartment, the same poison that was used to kill Mr. Finch. We also found a handwritten note detailing your plan to kill him. Can you explain that? Smith shook his head, his eyes filled with desperation. I didn't do it, he pleaded. I'm being framed. Someone is trying to set me up. Miller sighed. He knew that Smith was lying, but he also knew that he needed to break him down, to get him to confess. The game of cat and mouse had begun. He leaned back, his eyes locked on Smith's. All right, Mr. Smith, he said softly. Let's start from the beginning. The interrogation would be long, but Miller was patient. He would wait. He always did. Hours into the interrogation, Mr. Smith's carefully constructed facade began to crumble. He had initially been calm and collected, answering Miller's questions with carefully rehearsed responses. But as the hours wore on, his composure began to crack. He fidgeted in his chair, his hands trembled, and his eyes darted around the room, avoiding Miller's gaze. Miller sensed that he was getting closer to the truth. He decided to focus on the fingerprint evidence, the one piece of evidence that Smith couldn't explain away. He slid a photograph of the fingerprint across the table, placing it directly in front of Smith. Take a good look at this, Mr. Smith, he said, his voice firm but controlled. This is your fingerprint. It was found on a coffee cup near the scene of the crime. Smith stared at the photograph, his face paling. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. We know you were there, Mr. Smith, Miller continued. We have security camera footage of you entering the coffee shop. We have witnesses who saw you near Finch's apartment. We know you're lying. Smith's eyes welled up with tears. He looked like a trapped animal, cornered and desperate. It was a mistake, he whispered, his voice barely audible. I didn't mean to kill him. Miller leaned forward, his gaze intensifying. What did you say, Mr. Smith? Speak up. We can barely hear you. Smith took a deep breath, his hands shaking uncontrollably. I said. It was a mistake, he repeated, his voice louder this time. I didn't mean for it to happen. Miller nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. Tell me what happened, Mr. Smith, he said softly. Tell me the truth. Smith closed his eyes, his body trembling. He knew that he had reached the end of the line. He could no longer maintain his charade of innocence. The fingerprint, that single, careless mistake, had undone everything. He began to sob, his body racked with guilt and remorse. I was desperate, he stammered. I needed the money. I was going to lose everything. Miller remained silent, allowing Smith to compose himself. He knew that the confession was coming. He could feel it. I went to see Finch, Smith continued, his voice choked with emotion. I was going to ask him for a loan. But he refused. He said I was a thief, a liar, a failure. Miller nodded. And then what happened, Mr. Smith? Smith's voice cracked. I lost it, he sobbed. I snapped. I didn't mean to hurt him. But I couldn't stop myself. The carefully planned murder was now being revealed, piece by piece. The coffee cup sat heavy in the room, an unseen witness to Smith's crumbling resolve. With the floodgates now open, Mr. Smith confessed everything. He detailed how he had planned the murder for months, meticulously researching the poison, studying Finch's habits, and devising a foolproof plan to avoid detection. He explained his motive: he was desperate for money, drowning in debt, and Finch had refused to help him. He recounted how he had gone to Finch's apartment that night, intending to ask for a loan, but the conversation had escalated into an argument. Finch had accused him of being a thief, a liar, a failure. Smith, consumed by rage and desperation, had snapped. He admitted to lacing Finch's drink with cyanide, watching as the poison took effect. He described how he had cleaned up the scene, carefully removing any traces of his presence. He explained how he had disposed of his gloves and shoe covers, and how he had created an alibi. But he also revealed the one, fatal mistake that had undone everything: the coffee cup. He explained how he had needed a coffee after the murder, how he had carelessly tossed the cup into a public bin without thinking. "It was stupid," he sobbed. "I know it was stupid. But I wasn't thinking straight. I was so relieved to have gotten away with it, I just wanted a coffee. I didn't even think about the fingerprints." Miller listened intently, recording every word of Smith's confession. He knew that he had his man. The confession, combined with the overwhelming evidence, would ensure a conviction. "Why did you take out a life insurance policy?" Miller asked, his voice calm. Smith hesitated. I wanted to make sure my family was taken care of," he said. "I knew I was going to get caught. I just wanted to leave them something." Miller nodded. "And what about the note we found in your apartment, the one detailing your plan to kill Finch?" Smith sighed. "I wrote that a long time ago," he said. "Before I actually did it. I was just fantasizing about it. I never thought I would actually go through with it." Miller didn't believe him, but he didn't press the point. He had everything he needed. The confession was complete. Mr. Smith had admitted to planning and carrying out the murder of Arthur Finch. The case was closed. As the interrogation came to an end, Smith looked up at Miller, his eyes filled with remorse. "I'm sorry," he said. "I know it doesn't mean much, but I am truly sorry. I ruined everything. I ruined my life. I ruined my family's life. And I took away someone else's life." Miller remained silent, his expression unreadable. He had heard it all before. He knew that words were cheap. It was actions that mattered. And Mr. Smith's actions had led him to this moment: a confession, a conviction, and a life behind bars. All because of a carelessly discarded coffee cup. The evidence spoke volumes, but Mr. Smith's confession sealed his fate. Weeks later, as the trial of John Smith drew to a close, Detective Inspector Miller found himself standing once again before the rain-streaked window of his office. The city lights blurred in the distance, mirroring the complex thoughts swirling in his mind. The trial had been a formality. The evidence against Smith was overwhelming, and his confession had sealed his fate. The jury had deliberated for only a few hours before returning a guilty verdict. Smith would spend the rest of his life behind bars. Miller sighed, taking a sip of his tea. The case was closed, justice had been served, but he couldn't shake a lingering sense of unease. He had seen firsthand the meticulous planning, the cold-blooded calculation, the desperate motive that had driven Smith to commit murder. But he had also seen the one, fatal flaw that had undone everything: the coffee cup. It was a stark reminder that even the most careful plans can be derailed by a single, careless mistake. That human nature is inherently imperfect, and that even the most meticulous criminals are prone to lapses in judgment. He thought about P.C. Riley, the fresh-faced officer who had found the coffee cup in the bin. It was a testament to the importance of diligence and attention to detail. Even the most mundane tasks can yield valuable clues, if you're willing to look closely enough. He also thought about Sarah, the skilled forensics technician who had identified the fingerprint on the cup. Her expertise and dedication had been instrumental in cracking the case. It was a reminder of the vital role that forensics plays in modern law enforcement. He reflected on the nature of justice, the delicate balance between evidence, procedure, and human judgment. He knew that the system was far from perfect, but he also believed that it was the best system we had. He knew that Smith's actions had been driven by greed and desperation, but he also recognized the human element in the story. Smith was not a monster, but a flawed human being who had made a series of terrible choices. As he gazed out at the city lights, Miller felt a renewed sense of purpose. He knew that there were many more cases out there, waiting to be solved. And he was determined to continue his work, to unravel the mysteries, and to bring the guilty to justice. He knew the system worked, because of a single cup of coffee. Justice was served, a small mistake unraveled the best-laid plans. The rain continued to fall, washing the streets clean, a symbol of the cleansing power of justice.